Hey guys, just some quick thoughts on art. So one of the big questions in the philosophy of art is, what is the definition of art? What makes something an artwork? Now, Ian Hacking has a nice discussion of social constructionism in his book, The Social Construction of What, where he says that when we're talking about social constructionism, don't first ask for the meaning, ask what's the point. So the idea here is that when somebody calls something a social construct, when somebody says that gender is a social construct or that race is a social construct or whatever, you might think that philosophical analysis would begin by saying, okay, what exactly do we mean by social construct? And we engage in this rather abstract discussion of concepts and meanings. But Hacking says this is really a mistake. We should really be asking, why exactly is this kind of analysis being done? What does the author hope to gain from this analysis? Because a lot of the social construction literature is involved in a kind of activism. The idea is that when we call something a social construct, we're claiming that it's contingent, it's not inevitable, and perhaps also that it's bad and that it would be better if we could change it. So anyway, that's just a bit of background there. My thought was, I wonder if the same kind of idea might be useful when we think about how to define art. That really, when somebody calls something art, perhaps the first question we should have is not what is the definition of art, but what's the point? What's the point of calling this art? What do we hope to gain from calling something art? I guess my feeling is that in many cases, the term art functions almost like a kind of excuse. Once something has been identified as art, it sort of isn't open to the kind of any usual standards of evaluation, let's say. I mean, like most of our actions will take place in a context or a conversation where they have to be justified. They have to meet various kinds of standards. Like if I bake a cake for a party, people need to find the cake tasty. On the other hand, if I bake a cake and it's just a piece of art, then it doesn't have to be approached in any particular way, and it doesn't have to be held to any particular standards. I can sort of do anything and call it art. When I say this is art, it almost excuses me from providing a justification for doing it. I don't need a reason to do it. And that seems to be kind of what's going on in a lot of modern art. It's worth noting that this view has, I think, interesting consequences for questions like, is pornography art? Because in the case of pornography, a condition of success, let's say, is that the pornography should turn people on, or at least it should turn certain types of people on. I mean, obviously, you're never going to turn everybody on, but pornography is designed to turn certain types of people on, people with certain tastes. It aims itself at people with certain tastes, and it's designed to turn them on. And so the pornography is successful insofar as it manages to turn those people on. Whereas art doesn't have to do that. I mean, art can turn people on. Art can be pornographic, I guess, but art never has to. If I create something that looks pornographic but that doesn't turn me on, I can excuse it by saying it's art. I can't excuse it by saying it's pornography, because the fact that it doesn't turn me on would then lead me to conclude that I'd failed at what I was trying to do. But if it's art, then I haven't necessarily failed. So then this is an important difference between pornography and art, is that pornography is judged according to certain standards, is always judged according to certain standards that we wouldn't always bring to art, or that it would sometimes be inappropriate to bring to art. Part of the reason why I've been thinking about this is because people have been asking me, hey, what's going on with those red dot videos? And I guess technically those videos would be little bits of art. I mean, they don't mean anything. I'm not trying to communicate any particular message. They're certainly not going to be at all useful. They're not really even intended to be particularly aesthetically pleasing. I just find them mildly interesting for one reason or another, and I'm kind of into a lot of modern art and abstract art and things like that. So You know, why not? Why not put something like that up on the channel? And when I say that they're art, I think that what I'm really doing is trying to excuse myself from having to give any reason for creating those videos. I mean, that seems to be the idea. That seems to be the sort of function of the term art there. Of course, there are limits to this view of art as a kind of excuse. I mean, for one thing, artworks are still held to various standards, like moral standards. If I was to start waving a Nazi flag and I was to say this is art, I don't think people would consider that to be much of an excuse. Obviously, a lot of artworks are held to very stringent standards. People often expect artworks to be aesthetically beautiful or to exhibit talent or to have some sort of political message or whatever. But the point is, they don't need to. You don't, like, an artwork doesn't have to meet any of those standards. Like, it can, and there are traditions of art that have very stringent standards, but it doesn't have to. An artwork doesn't have to do anything in particular, really. Of course, I am assuming here a view of art that I guess would be associated with modern art. Modern art maybe created the institution of art as an excuse. For many people, they reject this approach to art. For many people, to call something art is to evaluate it with respect to often quite stringent standards of talent or beauty or whatever else. So it's maybe kind of interesting, actually, that the word art has these two sort of usages. That for many people, art is a kind of normative term with very high standards that will be like, you can intend to create a piece of art and then fail because it doesn't exhibit the required amount of talent or the required amount of beauty. And a lot of people will say this about a lot of modern art paintings. They might say that abstract expressionism, people like Jackson Pollock, that's just not art. Even though he intended to create art, he failed because he didn't meet the standard. So that's one usage. But then there's this other usage of the term where it kind of functions as a term that excuses you, that allows you to just create something without worrying about any of these standards. It's kind of interesting that there's that dual usage of the term that's still sort of common. I mean, in a way, it's interesting that we had this term art that is associated with very, very high standards, but now, as a result of modern art and other movements like that, it's started to function as a kind of excuse, as something that removes the need to worry about standards. So, yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about that, but at least you now know what those red dot videos are about. Well, they're not about anything. they're just sort of there, Okay, that's all.